Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is a follow-up to the recently released SADC a report on the 23rd August Zimbabwe elections. The final report is out. And on social media, it's been circulating this confession by Zimbabwe's president, Emerson Mnangagwa. Just listen to this.
You had frightened me that I am meeting CEOs, meaning people who have succeeded in life and are at the top. Okay. But of course, without election. Which is good. Because in elections, you rig. I doubt whether there's any rig in the CEO. I think it's on merit. So I am talking to people who are the top by merit. Further, I hope
it never ceases to amaze me, the mentality of Zimbabweans. He was speaking there, as we can see in the background, at the Chief Executive Officer conference. And he was admitting that he is at this gathering of CIOs who have got to the top by merit because there are no elections. Because if there are elections, you rig elections. And they thought it was a funny joke. Can't believe it. These are supposed to be chief executive officers, the cream of the cream. And they think that is a joke. That is not a joke. And I think all of them also knew that he was telling the truth. He did rig the elections. He has been rigging elections since the country's independence. And that's why ZANU-PF has stayed in power for 43 years and counting. A month ago, he was at the world stage at the UN General Assembly. And he said he had won the Zimbabwe elections had been free, fair, and credible. And he had won. Didn't talk about rigging then. So here is a man who is in the habit of saying one thing today and saying another tomorrow. And of course, we know that in this case here, he's definitely telling the truth. The SADC Election Observer Team report, final report, has just been released. And it confirms exactly what he's saying here, that those elections were rigged. This is the conclusion of that report. And for those who can't read it, I'll just read it out. Conclusion 13.3. The SADC Election Observer Mission report noted that, as detailed in sections 6 and 7 of this report, some aspects of the harmonized elections fell short of the requirements of the Constitution of Zimbabwe, the Zimbabwe Election Act, and the SADC principles and guidelines governing democratic elections. It could not be more explicit. These elections failed to meet the requirements. And if you have the opportunity to read those sections 6 and 7, they go into detail. One of the issues they raised is the issue of the failure to produce a verified voters roll. What must be noted here is that this is the voters roll on which you base your elections. And this is a voters roll that was supposed to be verifiable. ZEC failed to produce a verified voters roll. This did not only affect a few wards or 1 or 2 constituencies. This affected the whole country. It was the whole voters roll. One group in Zimbabwe, Chimpachedu, had managed to clean around and get copies of the voters roll. And what they found in those voters rolls were outraging mistakes and irregularities. They found in some cases 20 people registered at an address big enough to only accommodate 4 people at most. They found in the voters roll cases of people who found they'd been in the voters roll and yet their name is suddenly disappeared. They never told ZEC to remove them, so ZEC did that on their own. They found in the voters roll cases of people living on the same address. We have lived on the same address for the last 10 years or more. Suddenly find themselves in a situation where if there are 4 of them, one of them finds each one of those would be asked to vote at a different polling station. Sometimes in a different ward, sometimes even in a different constituency. How is that possible? What necessitated that move? The people themselves never applied to have those changes made. Those are the aspects of the election process that SADC observers picked up. And that is why they came to the conclusion that the process fell short of the requirements of Zimbabwe's constitution, electoral law, and SADC's own guidelines. There can be no doubt that the Zimbabwe election was flawed and illegal. What else did you want them to say? That is what they are saying there. In his preliminary report, the head of the SADC election observer team did use those words. The process was flawed and illegal. It doesn't appear in the final report, but I think that is as diplomatically put as you'll ever get. Some people in ZANU-PF are already trying to suggest that there's nothing wrong with that report and it should be considered as finished. Let's move on. I think it would be a big mistake to do so. We can't move on. We have got to go back to that report. That report is abundantly clear. The Zimbabwe election was flawed and illegal. And per se, they could not produce a legitimate government. This ZANU-PF government is illegal. If it quacks like a duck, walks like a duck, looks like a duck, it is a duck. These elections were rigged. In Shona, we have got a saying that Mvandiripo ane fuma yedzinza. It is a rational thing to say. Mvandiripo means he doesn't belong to that family grouping. And therefore, then, his commitment to the good of that family is not there. I think it's the same thing when you rig elections. You become an imposter. You know you're not going to be accountable. And therefore, then you do anything you want. You even boast about it. Because you know you'll never be held to account. How many of those CEOs who are attending this conference would have wanted to see Zimbabwe hold free, fair, and credible elections? As chief executive officers, they will know that the Zimbabwe economy is in a serious mess. It could do a lot better if it was run more competently. But they know that as long as ZANU-PF remains in power, they are powerless to change that. He is telling them to their faces, I'm an imposter, but what the hell are you going to do about it? I rig elections. And therefore, then my position is assured. SADC owes it to the people of Zimbabwe not to sweep this damning SADC election report under the carpet. This is the chance that the people of Zimbabwe have to seriously end this case of rigged elections and bad governance. Dr. Mumba, who was heading the SADC election observer team, has done the country a big favor. He has done the whole region, in fact, a big favor. Because the continued instability in Zimbabwe, like it or not, is affecting everybody. And those who think or believe that it doesn't matter are completely wrong. Millions of Zimbabweans have left the country. They're scattered all over the globe as economic and or political refugees. The millions who have been left behind, many of them are living in abject poverty. Zimbabwe is going nowhere. And the man responsible for it is not even ashamed. He even boasts about how he's rigging elections. You CEOs got to the top by merit because there are no elections. If there were elections, you rig. I am at the top because I rig elections. During the election itself, when one of the ZANU-PF leaders thought he was being bold by saying, Asnembafa, let's end corruption. Mnangagwa turned it into a joke. He started talking of Mbafa for ED. In a way, he was right. Zimbabwe must have spent at least $5 billion US in the last elections. Or to be more specific, ZANU-PF has spent at least $5 billion in the last elections. Povo, ordinary people, had chicken in, pieces of chicken in, and chips distributed. At every rally, and free drinks, feeding all those people and passing them around the country costed money. And it didn't stop there. Traditional leaders, headmen, chiefs, and so forth were also bribed. Chiefs got twin cab trucks. It went all the way up to the top, to the judges. Judges were given 400,000 US. That's conveniently called a housing allowance. They never applied for it. And why it's called a housing allowance, one beggars belief, because everybody knows that they are not expected to pay it back. All that adds up. And this is a country that is failing to maintain even the most basic services. And yet we can afford to splash money like that. Mnangagwa is not even ashamed of that. That is part of the rigging. And as far as he's concerned, it's fair game. There's nothing wrong with that. What he was saying at this conference is, you guys got to where you are on merit. I didn't need merit because I'm able to rig elections. I think it is time that people stood up and say, no, enough is enough. SADC election observers did Zimbabwe a great service by saying, no, these elections were rigged. I think it is up to us, Zimbabweans, to make sure that SADC does not sweep this report under the carpet. Mubvandiripo hanei nefuma yedzinza. It is a common sense thing. If you're not accountable, how you can afford to be reckless with public finances? You can afford to have this looting spree. Mnangagwa knows that he is not democratically accountable to anybody, and that is why he is so reckless. How long are we going to allow this madness to continue? That is the question that people out there should be asking themselves. We can't afford to continue pretending that there's nothing wrong here. There is definitely something wrong here. Before I close, I'll just post a comment here from one of the listeners. What is the way forward? I think that is a very honest and pertinent question. In my view, the way forward is very clear. At the present moment, the number one issue is to make sure that SADC does not sweep the report, the damning report, under the carpet. If we allow SADC to sweep the damning report under the carpet and rubber stamp Mnangagwa's rigged elections, then we have got another 5 years of this corrupt and inept government. That is the truth. That is the reality. And if we do not address it, who will? If we can force SADC, there's been stories on the social media that SADC are going to have an extraordinary summit in Tanzania on the 31st of this month to discuss this very issue of Zimbabwe elections. It has not been widely confirmed. I hope that meeting will take place. If it was to take place, I think it will be because SADC are going to endorse the report and confirm that the ZANU-PF government is illegitimate. What will happen after that? If that was to happen, well, the next big challenge would be to make sure that this time we appoint men and women who are going to implement the democratic reforms to make sure that Zimbabwe does go back to a democratic footing. That opportunity we had during the 2008 to 2013 GNU, but alas, not even one token reform was implemented. This time we cannot afford to make that mistake again. So that is the way forward, the way I see it. If we let SADC sweep the report under the carpet, then we have got to fight this from scratch. Once you have endorsed a government into power, I think this idea that we can somehow stage street protests and force it out is, to say the least, misguided. Street protests are not meant to achieve regime change. And when you're talking about a regime that is reckless and ruthless, like ZANU-PF, you're only giving them an excuse to shoot people. And I don't think anything will come out of sacrificing more people on the street. We will have to look at the next election and come up with what are we going to do then. The main objective of that is, of course, if those elections, if no democratic reforms have been implemented, there is no point in participating in those elections only to give ZANU-PF legitimacy. That is the argument that has been said again and again, but unfortunately have never been followed through. But that is the rational position. We will have to get an opposition that is prepared to stand up and be counted. There's no point in participating in elections only to give ZANU-PF legitimacy. That point was made by David Coulthard in his book, and I've quoted it here, and I can quickly bring it up for those who maybe have not seen it before. This is a quotation from David Coulthard's book, and he was talking of the 2013 elections there. We were saying that the process itself was so flawed, so illegal, that the only logical step was to withdraw. He and his friends in the opposition camp could not withdraw because they also were aware that if you participate, ZANU-PF will have a few seats to entice you to participate. And since 2018, as we know, Mnangagwa has sweetened up the opposition to entice them to participate by creating the pollard, where all the losing candidates of the presidential race will be given twin cab trucks worth $60,000 US and a number of frisbees, as long as they publicly stand up and say the elections were free, fair, and credible, and ZANU-PF's Mnangagwa is legitimate. For the this last election, 2023 election, Mnangagwa had to come up with something, because he knew that pollard treaties were going to invite many people to participate. And I believe if he had not introduced the requirement for those participating in these elections to pay a nomination fee of US $20,000, I believe that for the presidential race, we could have had as many as 50 candidates. And I think he realized that that was going to be seen as a joke. So the nomination fee was introduced purely to try to limit the number of people who participate. Otherwise, if you can raise the $20,000 US, the rewards are worth it. And I'm sure a number of the candidates, of the 9 losing candidates, many of them are going to swear that the elections were free, fair, and credible. And hope that Mnangagwa will give them the twin cab with 60,000 US dollars. Good return on your investment. You spend 20 and you get 60,000. That's not too bad. Plus the other frisbees that goes with the Pollard. But that is what David Coulthard was talking about there. That he and his colleagues could not resist those attractions, the gravy train seats. Just to maybe quickly mention, now that we've been talking about Coulthard's comment there, I think the other point worth noting here is that the opposition right now, they are fighting among themselves. I think that is creating an excuse for some of the SADC leaders, at least, who were keen as mustard to rubber stamp the elections and grant ZANU-PF legitimacy. Because the infighting in the opposition will only encourage those to turn around and look to their colleagues and say, listen, if we remove ZANU-PF and declare it illegitimate, who are we going to deal with? The confusion in Triple C right now tells them you are going to be in serious trouble. And some of those leaders will tell you, look, they were in the GNU last time. They failed to implement even one meaningful reform. Are we prepared to have another GNU where there is the same confusion? I must admit, if I was one of the SADC leaders, it is definitely food for thought. However, my argument to those SADC leaders would be they've got to accept that Zimbabwe's political system is so flawed that it has failed to produce quality leaders, not only in ZANU-PF, but in the opposition too. Think of Zimbabwe as a sewage pond. You'll never get quality fish out of that. This is why we need reforms. The reforms are designed to drain the sewage pond, fill it up with clean water, and then you can introduce quality fish. You will never get quality leaders in Zimbabwe as long as this present political system exists. It is that simple. Just got one more comment from somebody. Oh, it's Grace, and this is what Grace has got to say. So he has agreed to rigging. That is not New Zimbabwe, ZANU-PF, sorry. Well, I think ZANU-PF's normal position is to deny that elections were rigged. They have maintained the single position that elections were free, fair, and credible. That is their normal position. And in this case here, his admission that he rigged the election is somebody getting too bold, if you ask me. He knows there's nothing you can do about it anyway. You know, I rigged the election, so what? That is the arrogance we have now reached. At least somebody will try to deny that I rigged them. But he's so confident now that even if you know that I rigged, so what are you going to do about it? Nothing. And so he is admitting it. This is not the first time he has made a similar confession, actually, if you want to hear the truth. after the shooting of people in January 2019, he claimed that to the public media, to the world, he said that no one was killed. The women who were abducted and raped, those are false reports. And a few weeks later, when he was addressing a ZANU-PF rally in Mwenezi, he was admitting that, we've got some troublemakers and we send the army to teach them a lesson. So Mnangagwa has been known to do that. And I think now he has become so arrogant. He really believes that there's nothing anyone can do about it. And that's why he's so arrogant. So that is the reality that we are facing in Zimbabwe. When you're dealing with somebody who is so arrogant, he's totally indifferent to the realities of what is happening. Got one more comment here from Tina. And she's saying, does it mean that all hope is gone since we don't have any alternative leadership to compete with the present government? Well, I think that point, I addressed it earlier on when I said that in the present political system, you will never have quality leaders. Never. The present political system is so rough. You need to be a thug to survive. And of course, if you get in there as a thug, you're not likely to be a Democrat. And this is why you will never have quality leaders. You do not have quality leaders in ZANU-PF itself or in the opposition. As I said, Zimbabwe is at present, as far as I'm concerned, a sewage pond. It's supposed to be one of those dams, but they've been letting sewage into that dam for so long that it's now turned into a sewage pond. There's no oxygenated waters in there. All the fish have died. It's only the catfish, frogs, and some of these other creatures that can live in waters with no oxygen. They can come up to take a breath. But if you go fishing in there, you'll never catch quality fish. Never. This is why it is important to implement the democratic reforms. If you implement the democratic reforms, there will be serious, meaningful debate, and there will be the usual democratic discourse, which will allow quality people to emerge. Not the present political system where it's slogans and threats. And if you are one of those ruffians, you get promoted in the party very quickly. You take up leadership positions. And you do not fight the opposition by your arguments. Try to win the people's votes by persuading them that you have got better policies. You rigged the elections. This is exactly what Mnangagwa was saying there. I didn't get to this top position because of merit. I rigged the elections. So if you've mastered the art of rigging the elections, you do not have to worry about having quality policies, solutions to get the country out of this mess. You don't need all those. He's not accountable to anybody. And so he doesn't have to worry about how am I using the nation's public resources. He doesn't have to worry about that. That is the cycle we are in. Another comment from Tina, sorry. I don't blame ZANU anyways, because what's the point in writing a report and not act upon it? SADC knows that people will be persecuted. So what's the point? Well, I think in this particular case, there are SADC leaders who are genuinely interested in seeing those free, fair, and credible elections held in not only Zimbabwe, in all the SADC countries, because they realize that that is the essence of good governance. And to be fair to SADC leaders, some of them were genuinely committed to helping Zimbabwe get out of the mess. We've got to give them full credit for the 2008 GNU. It was a golden opportunity for Zimbabwe to get out. The unfortunate reality is that we did not have the quality leaders in the opposition to implement the democratic reforms. It is no secret that Mugabe bribed Morgan Tsvangirai and company with the trappings of high office. And the rest is history, as they say. We cannot deny that. And I think that one of the tragedies about Zimbabwe is that even today, with the benefit of hindsight, many people out there still do not understand what the primary purpose of the 2008 to 2013 GNU was for. The primary purpose of that GNU was to implement the democratic reforms, to stop a repeat of the blatant cheating and wanton violence that happened in 2008. But if you do not understand what the reforms are about, then of course, you also do not understand that the GNU's primary purpose was for, and that CCC or MDC then sold out. And then if you cannot blame MDC for selling out over something that you yourself do not understand. So the problem comes back to ignorance. A lot of Zimbabweans out there, whether we like to admit it to ourselves or not, it's irrelevant. What matters is the reality. The reality is a lot of Zimbabweans out there do not understand that. And they failed to understand that. And this is why we are in this mess. Zimbabwe is a failed state, mainly because we've got corrupt and incompetent leaders, CIOs, chief executive officers, like Mnangagwa himself, who doesn't even know what he's talking about. But we also have got to admit that the ordinary person, the ordinary Zimbabwean, is to blame for it. Because who has kept these buffoons in power? It is the ordinary Zimbabwean. That is a reality that we cannot deny. So, thank you very much for listening. And again, I come back to my main message on this discussion, that Mnangagwa is admitting that he rigged the elections. The SADC report states clearly that the elections were rigged. And the question now is, we should not let SADC get away with by sweeping the SADC report under the carpet, because that will only mean they've confirmed Mvantiripo, an imposter who admits that he rigged the elections, to stay in power for another 5 years. And another 5 years of this government is unthinkable. the fight to make sure that ZANU-PF does not get legitimacy is the most important fight of our generation. And we should not be found wanting in making that fight. With that, thank you very much for listening, and we'll meet again next time. Have a good day.